versus cause.
Lifeguard Micah. Yes, sir. We've got an adult flight request for ADAC, and they requested that we turn it over to you guys. Yes.
The dispatch room at Providence Medical Center in Anchorage, Alaska is the nerve center for the medevac teams of Lifeguard.
Yes, ma'am. We have a
24 hours a day, every day, Lifeguard dispatchers monitor the volatile weather, communicate with the transport teams, and receive urgent calls for help. Once the call comes in, the rescue clock starts ticking, and weather permitting, Lifeguard's fixed-wing aircraft are in the air within minutes.
Time of call, 1538. Activation is the same. Transport number 030894, over.
A commercial fisherman with a high fever and severe abdominal pain has been transported by boat to a clinic in Adak, a remote island in the Aleutian chain, over 1,000 miles from Anchorage. Adak Island is actually closer to Russia than it is to the Alaskan mainland, and the high winds often make the trip a dangerous high-wire act for the crew. Jake Homer and Corey Zernia are called into duty to fly today. Brian Carrier and Karen Friedel are the flight nurses on duty.
And increasing fever. I've heard two numbers. One of them was at 103.7. That was as high as it was. I don't know if that's pre or post Tylenol. I think we can assume the only care he got on the ship would have been from, first aid level and from the ship's captain. We might be dealing with septic shock by the time we get out there. So this patient, could be really straightforward and simple, or we could be dealing with, something pretty severe. So
if he's at a temperature of 103.7, we'll have to have seizure precautions, so use of Valium and perhaps Dilantin.
We only have 2 nurses to care for a patient, so when they become very unstable, there's only 2. So that's why we always have our guard up. We always are prepared for the worst case scenario, because if you're not, your patient's life is really in jeopardy.
Smooth ahead at 340, negative ice, negative turbulence on the climb out of Anchorage.
Safely piloting a medevac aircraft in Alaska means constantly planning for trouble. Jake Homer is concerned about his options if the weather at Adak worsens and he's unable to land there. To provide a margin of safety, he makes the decision to refuel the aircraft on the way, just in case.
It's about 1,150 miles down to Adak, and there are no places around Adak to get gas. You are not going to get back to anywhere safely. So depending on the weather, we generally stop about halfway at a place called Cold Bay. That way, if we leave Cold Bay and get to the destination of Adak and can't get in, then we can at least get back to another airport for fuel. The Aleutian chain is where all the weather in this hemisphere originates. It can be absolutely horrible. The wind can blow 100 miles an hour. In fact, it was blowing about 35 today when we landed at Cold Bay for fuel.
80 knots.
In Cold Bay, the wind blows so fiercely that no trees grow on this desolate island. Corey supervises the refueling of the Learjet while the flight nurses prepare for the patient.
At that point in time, I did make a call to the clinic to see what the patient's condition was, which helps us to know if we need to get special medications prepared beforehand, because certainly when we go to these outlying clinics or hospitals, the goal is to get in and get out fast.
Airborne again and full of fuel, Jake and Corey head away from Cold Bay and plot their path to the airstrip at Adak.
Just departed Cold Bay, and pretty quick here we'll be coming up with Bean Dutch Harbor on our way out to Adak. So that's about where we're at right now, coming right up here.
The unpredictable and often extreme weather make flying in Alaska unlike anywhere else in the world. But people in Alaska love to fly, and they use their aircraft the way people in the lower 48 use their cars. More than 10,000 Alaskans have their pilot certificates, more per capita than anywhere else in the U.S. But that doesn't mean that flying in Alaska is easy.
I think it's probably one of the most challenging flight regimes in the world. The weather changes so drastically. In the summertime, you can have beautiful sunlit days or high gusty winds. The wintertime, here in Anchorage, it's 20 hours of darkness versus 4 hours of daylight.
Flying in Alaska is very challenging, yeah, and I think that's why a lot of people like to do it up here, because you keep your skills really on edge because you're flying in challenging conditions. It keeps it really interesting.
Damien Vigil flies a Fairchild Merlin for FS Air, one of 3 medical aviation companies based in Anchorage.
The transponder's on, bias is on, bleeds are on, button speed panel time. Here we go.
In Alaska, as versus lower 48, I have to say the places that we fly to, most of them don't have runway lights. The lack of being able to plow the runway during the winter is always a factor. Strong winds, just the ever-changing weather. I think it's very dangerous. What we do, there's just so many factors that we have no control over. I have over 7,000 hours of flying, and I have a healthy respect for the danger that's involved.
FS Air transports patients to Alaska Regional Hospital, one of the only civilian hospitals in the country with a runway in its backyard.
Alaska Regional really has a unique situation in terms of their Merlin being able to land at Merrill Field, and that in essence is like a helicopter landing on a helipad right there at your hospital. It cuts down that 10, 15, 20 minutes of ground ambulance transport that you have to do if you're landing at Anchorage International Airport and then having to go to the hospital. Wonderful.
The vast distances and rugged terrain of the Alaskan frontier create enormous challenges for medevac teams. Pilots here use whatever the task demands: Merlins, turbine helicopters, Metroliners, and the speediest of them all, Learjet 35s.
In Alaska, there's no perfect aircraft for the mission. Currently, we're operating a BK-117 helicopter, a Lear 35 jet, and a King Air 200 turboprop. Those 3 aircraft gives us the best of everything in order to cover the area that we cover here within the state.
Hello, this is Robert.
It's a busy day in Anchorage, and another call for help has come into the dispatch center of FS Air. Robert Hester is working the desk.
A flight? Okay, where to? Kodiak? Okay. And what time did you get your call? All right, let me get some weather and I'll call you right back. All right, thanks. Bye.
An 8-year-old girl has fallen 12 feet off a ledge on Kodiak Island, 450 miles south of Anchorage. She has multiple fractures and needs more advanced treatment than the local hospital can give her. She must be moved as soon as possible. But the unpredictable Alaskan weather is not cooperating.
Problems we've got right now is the winds here in Anchorage are gusting almost 30 straight across the runway, with one of the runways being torn up. The other runway in Kodiak's got some wind problems as well. This is another day in Alaska.
The 30-mile-per-hour crosswind means a dangerous return for planes like the Metroliner that will be used on this mission. Robert and the medevac team have no alternative but to wait for the winds to decrease.